The missile is 5 seconds from impact when the impossible begins. On an infrared display, a white sphere hangs above the Red Sea. An AGM-114 Hellfire races toward it, guided by a laser, and moving fast enough to cross the final distance almost before an operator can blink. The sphere does not evade. It does not accelerate. It simply expands. For a fraction of a second, the missile enters the light. Then both are gone. No explosion blooms across the water. No burning fragments fall through the frame. The sea below appears dark and undisturbed. That is the story now circulating online. An alleged encounter involving an MQ-9 Reaper, a glowing object near Yemen, and a weapon that seems to disappear. No original video or complete sensor record has been authenticated publicly. No named official has confirmed it. But the allegation creates a question more disturbing than the video itself. If the image is real, what vanished over the Red Sea? The missile, the object, or our ability to trust what the sensor was showing us? To investigate that question, we have to begin with what can be established. The MQ-9 Reaper watches from a distance. Its sensor turret combines visible light and infrared imagery, tracking heat through darkness. It can also carry Hellfire missiles. Depending on the variant, a Hellfire weighs roughly 45 to 50 kilograms and can approach Mach 1.3. It is a system of propulsion, guidance, metal, electronics, and explosive force. And that matters because none of those components can simply cease to exist. If a missile strikes an object, its momentum has to be transferred. Its body must deform, fragment, ricochet, or continue moving. If its warhead detonates, energy becomes heat, pressure, light, and motion. Even a failed weapon should leave something behind. A cooling motor, falling debris, a disturbance on the surface, or a changing thermal signature. The alleged clip appears to show none of it. That absence is the mystery. It is also the first warning that the story may not be what it seems. Digital military video is not a transparent window onto reality. Sensors, processing, compression, stabilization, and targeting overlays all shape the final image. A recording may then be cropped, re-encoded, or removed from its original context before reaching the public. Break any link in that chain, and an ordinary event can become extraordinary. Imagine a hot missile crossing a colder background. The sensor automatically adjusts its gain to preserve detail. The target blooms, appearing larger than its physical dimensions. Two bright signatures overlap. For several frames, the software can no longer separate them. Then the camera changes exposure, the tracking box shifts, or the missile leaves the field of view. On a compressed clip, the sequence might resemble absorption. One object enters another and disappears. That does not prove a sensor artifact. It shows why a few dramatic frames are not enough. Investigators would need the original file, not a recording of a recording. They would need timestamps, range data, viewing angle, frame rate, sensor mode, aircraft position, missile telemetry, and radar tracks from the surrounding area. They would also need the frames immediately before and after the circulating clip. Without those elements, no analyst can calculate distance accurately, determine whether the objects truly met, or even prove that the apparent sphere was hovering above the water. Perspective can deceive. A distant light and a nearby missile may appear to occupy the same point in a two-dimensional image, while remaining separated by hundreds of meters. A target that seems motionless may actually be moving directly toward or away from the camera. A bright, circular shape may not be spherical at all. Infrared glare can erase edges and turn aircraft, balloons, flares, or reflections into perfect white orbs. So the first possibility is brutally simple. The missile was never swallowed. The camera only made it look that way. The second possibility is darker, not because it breaks physics, but because it involves human intention. The Red Sea has become one of the most closely watched military corridors on Earth. Surveillance aircraft, naval vessels, commercial ships, missiles, drones, and electronic warfare systems operate within the same compressed battle space. In such an environment, deceptive footage has value. A fabricated encounter could be used to suggest that an adversary possesses an invulnerable defense system. It could force intelligence agencies to waste time. It could frighten the public, test how information spreads, or conceal a more conventional weapons failure behind a spectacular story. Modern deception does not require creating every pixel. A real clip can be relabeled, shortened, or surrounded with a false narrative until the narrative becomes more memorable than the image. And this alleged incident arrives with nearly every feature that should make an investigator cautious. Anonymous sources, an inaccessible briefing, an extraordinary physical claim, no unedited file, no identifiable witnesses, and technical conclusions that exceed what infrared imagery alone could reveal. The story claims the sphere converted the missile's kinetic and chemical energy into a localized electromagnetic pulse. But an infrared camera cannot diagnose that process. It records patterns of thermal radiation. It does not directly reveal gravity control, electromagnetic containment, or a rupture in space-time. Those explanations may sound scientific, yet without measurements they remain decoration, language placed over a blank space in the evidence. The phrase closed-door Pentagon briefing creates authority without allowing verification. The claim that officials panicked creates emotion without identifying anyone who felt it. The more detailed the anonymous story becomes, the easier it is to forget that its foundation has not moved. There is still no authenticated original. But suppose one appears. Suppose the metadata is intact. Suppose independent radar tracks confirm an unidentified object over the sea. Suppose missile telemetry proves that the weapon reached the target coordinates and then stops transmitting. Suppose the full resolution imagery shows no detonation, no debris, and no visible disturbance on the water. Only then would the third possibility become unavoidable. Something physically unusual occurred. Even in that case, alien technology would not be the first scientific conclusion. Analysts would test failure modes. The missile might have lost guidance and fallen outside the frame. Its motor could have burned out as the camera shifted exposure. The warhead might not have detonated. The glowing object could have been plasma, a flare, a burning component, or a classified countermeasure. Radar, optical, and infrared data would have to agree before anyone could describe the target's shape, speed, or behavior with confidence. Yet one detail would remain difficult to dismiss if the geometry were confirmed. The apparently calm water. An object entering the sea should displace it. The size of the splash depends on mass, speed, angle, and surface conditions. But the surface must respond. Heat may create steam. Momentum may produce spray or a wake. If both the sphere and the missile cross the surface at speed, a complete absence of visible disturbance would demand an explanation. It would not prove that the objects entered another dimension. It might mean the camera could not resolve the splash. The impact point might have been farther away than assumed. The sea surface might have been hidden by the sensor's angle or by thermal contrast. But if multiple instruments recorded the same silent transition, then the case would enter a category that military investigators have struggled to define: apparent transmedium behavior. Transmedium is a description, not an explanation. It refers to an object reported to move between environments, air and water, for example, without the obvious change in speed or visible disruption expected from known vehicles. Some military witnesses have described events they interpreted this way. Public UAP discussions have also repeated claims of unusual underwater speeds and objects descending toward the ocean. But testimony is not the same as a complete measurement package, and many famous accounts remain disputed because the underlying data have never been released. Water is not empty space. At high speed, it behaves like a wall. A conventional craft entering it must survive enormous forces. Underwater, drag rises rapidly with velocity, while cavitation creates bubbles, vibration, noise, and potential structural damage. A machine that crossed from air into water without slowing, splashing, or destroying itself would require either a revolutionary way to manage the surrounding fluid or a mechanism that prevents normal contact with it. That is where speculation begins. Ideas range from plasma or electromagnetic fields to an envelope that redirects matter around the craft. More extreme proposals invoke gravity or space-time. None has been demonstrated in connection with this allegation. Technical names do not turn speculation into evidence, but they expose why the allegation is so powerful. The fear is not merely that an unknown object survived one missile. Military systems are built on prediction. Radar estimates where a target will be. Guidance software predicts how it will move. Interceptors are launched because engineers understand the relationship between mass, speed, distance, and time. Every layer of defense assumes that an object must interact with the physical world in measurable ways. An object that produces no reliable radar return, ignores aerodynamic limits, crosses water without displacement, and neutralizes a missile without releasing visible energy would not simply be a better aircraft. It would sit outside the assumptions used to design the defense network. That is the genuine nightmare contained within the story. Not invasion, not an attack. Uncertainty. But how does a military respond to a contact it cannot measure? What rules apply when the image might be a sensor artifact, an enemy deception, a classified platform, or something no one can identify? Firing first may destroy evidence. It may expose weapons capabilities to an adversary. It may escalate an encounter with a system whose purpose is unknown. And if the object is harmless, the act of engagement could transform observation into confrontation. In the alleged Red Sea sequence, the sphere does not attack the drone. It does not pursue the launch platform. It appears, according to the story, to remove the incoming weapon and descend toward the ocean. If that description were verified, restraint would be the most unsettling part of the encounter. A machine that can defeat a weapon usually demonstrates power by destroying the attacker. This object supposedly did less. It ended the immediate threat and departed. That behavior could suggest automation, a defensive system executing a narrow response. It could suggest surveillance, with the object protecting itself while continuing an unknown mission. Or it could mean that the entire narrative was constructed to encourage precisely those interpretations. We cannot infer intention from a light on a screen. That sentence is easy to say and difficult to remember. Human beings are pattern-making machines. Faced with missing frames, we build a story between them. Faced with an unidentified object, we assign purpose. Faced with secrecy, we assume that someone behind a locked door already knows the answer. Secrecy may protect intelligence methods, unresolved analysis, operational mistakes, or classified technology. And unidentified does not mean unknowable. It means the available information has not produced a confident identification. The alleged Hellfire encounter remains below even that threshold. Until the source footage and supporting records can be examined, it is not a confirmed UAP case. It is a claim about a video, one that may exist, may have been altered, or may have acquired fictional details as it moved from one anonymous account to another. That does not make the story worthless. It makes the story a test. Can we separate what is visible from what we are told to see? Can we admit that a dramatic image is not the same as telemetry? Can we remain curious without surrendering skepticism? And if authentic evidence finally emerges, can we examine it without forcing it into the two stories waiting at the extremes? That everything is a hoax, or that every unexplained light belongs to a non-human intelligence? Somewhere between those extremes is the real work, locating the original recording, reconstructing the geometry, comparing independent sensors, identifying the weapon variant, and establishing a timeline that does not depend on anonymous atmosphere. That process is slower than a viral clip. It is less cinematic than a missile vanishing into light, but it is the only path from rumor to evidence. For now, the final frame remains empty water. Maybe the missile missed. Maybe the sensor blinked. Maybe someone manufactured a perfect military ghost story from a fragment of genuine footage. Or maybe a machine above the Red Sea demonstrated a capability that current public science cannot explain. The difference between those possibilities is not hidden inside the most dramatic frame. It is buried in the data we have not been shown. So, tell us what you think. Sensor failure, deliberate deception, classified technology, or something truly unknown? Put your conclusion and the evidence that convinced you in the comments. Subscribe to the Shadow Ledger and join us for the next file. Until the original footage surfaces, this case does not close. It waits in the dark.